Under the grand dome of the Galactic Council Hall, ancient lights shimmered like captured stars. Representatives of over 300 sentient species gathered, each adorned in ceremonial attire, their biosignatures glowing faintly in the Council's ambient field. The hall hummed with quiet diplomacy, but beneath the surface, something simmered. The Vorlax, a recently ascended warrior species, had just joined the Council. Their envoy, Threx of the Iron Blood lineage, stood at the central dais, his voice sharp, confident. "We wish to formally request human consultation for our military doctrine. Their strategic archives are unparalleled. Denying access is illogical. We ask why." The words hung heavy in the air. Several species stiffened. Others pretended to look uninterested. But everyone had heard him. Councillor Vetra of the Alari stood slowly. Her people were known for reason, for their love of order, and above all, for their belief in fairness. "The Vorlax raise a valid point. The humans are full members of this council. Yet they are absent from all military advisories, strategy councils, and defense coalitions. There is no public record as to why." A quiet click echoed as Archivist Zaynok rose. Ancient and slow, his 8 limbs moved deliberately. His skin shimmered with age, a patchwork of bioluminescent memories. His kind remembered everything. Every war. Every treaty. Every extinction. "There is a reason," Zaynok said, voice like aged stone. "But it has been buried, at humanity's own request." The Vorlax envoy scoffed. "Request? Or fear?" "Neither," Zaynok replied. "Respect." Whispers rippled through the hall. The council chamber was no stranger to war. Many of its members had risen through fire and conquest, later trading swords for diplomacy. War, in the council's view, was a phase, inevitable, necessary, and ultimately transcended. But humanity was different. No wars. No fleets on patrol. No tactical presence outside their home systems. They had not lifted a weapon in 500 standard cycles. And yet their vote held weight. Their technologies shaped infrastructure. Their diplomats brokered peace in contested systems. Their shadow loomed disproportionately large. The mystery festered in younger species like the Vorlax, war-born, proud, eager to test their mettle. Threx crossed his arms. "We train to face the best. We face simulations of theoretical humans in our war chambers. We win. And we are told, this is fantasy. How can an empire that does not fight be feared?" Zaynok did not answer immediately. Instead, he turned to the center console, activating the archival node. A flicker of data, a stream of unreadable glyphs, dates, voice clips, and blurred footage, flickered above the room. Then, just as quickly, it vanished. "You asked why humans are barred from warfare," the old archivist said slowly. "You asked because you were not there." Vetra's voice cut in, measured. "Then we should be shown the records." "No," Zaynok said. "They are sealed." "Then unseal them," Threx demanded. A hush fell. Zaynok's biolights dimmed. "Do you think we sealed those records to protect humans from you?" Silence. "We sealed them to protect you from them." A few counselors shifted uncomfortably. The Vorlax envoy pressed on. "Is that supposed to frighten us? You fear human strategy? We conquered 3-star systems in 30 rotations." Zaynok offered no challenge. Instead, he looked up at the council dome where ancient names were etched in orbiting memory halos, species long gone, alliances long dissolved. "They are not strategists," he said finally. "Not in the way you understand it. Humans do not wage war for territory, or dominance, or pride. They wage it for reasons deeper than instinct. Their motivations are flexible, messy, at times incomprehensible. And it is that unpredictability that makes them lethal." The room remained still. The words didn't land like threats. They settled like truths too heavy to ignore. Vetra looked thoughtful. "But surely, with enough understanding," Zaynok interrupted, softly. "We tried." He gestured, and for a moment, the archive flickered again, a ghost of a planet in flames. a fleet orbiting in silence. A voice recording began to play but cut off before intelligible words formed. Before the Accord, before the Council, before unity, there were many wars. And humanity fought in them. They led coalitions. They bled beside us. But what they did, how they fought, it changed us. Changed how? Threx demanded. They fought like beings who had nothing to lose, Zaynok said. Even when they had everything. They fought like poets. Like madmen. Like people who had seen too much of their own death to care. They refused to surrender not because of honor, but because surrender meant others would suffer. Even their enemies. Zaynok paused, letting the weight settle. Do you know what it means to face an enemy who will not stop, not because they hate you, but because they understand you? The Vorlax envoy opened his mouth, then closed it. Zaynok stepped back. You want strategy. You want knowledge. But humans did not win by strategy alone. They won because they turned their grief into fury, their love into sacrifice, their fear into resolve. They are not monsters. They are mirrors. And war is the worst thing you can ask them to remember. The hall was silent. Counselor Vectra spoke quietly. Then what do we do? Zaynok looked at the dimmed archive once more. You do what we did. You let them be. You let them build and dream and live. Because the only thing more dangerous than humanity at war is humanity remembering how good they were at it. No one spoke for several moments. Threx sat down slowly. The fire in his voice gone. Not extinguished, but tempered. The session adjourned in silence. And for the first time since their induction, the Vorlax left without a challenge, without a demand, without a roar of pride. Only the quiet realization that some legacies are not forged in fire, but buried beneath the ashes of restraint. The first encounter with humans was not recorded with celebration, but with confusion. They arrived late to the galactic stage, a primitive species barely past nuclear conflict, carrying ships stitched together with raw ambition and reckless engineering. They lacked the grace of the Zalari, the precision of the Alandari, or the collective unity of the Tricent collective. But within a single century, humans had mastered faster-than-light travel, mapped over 20 star systems, and adapted technologies others took generations to comprehend. It wasn't evolution, it was acceleration. And it terrified those who noticed. At first, their rapid expansion was dismissed as a primitive outburst. But when conflicts arose, inevitable disputes over resource-rich systems, human responses deviated from expected patterns. They did not posture. They did not bluff. When diplomacy failed, they fought. And they fought with a brutality wrapped in terrifying elegance. They didn't just counter strategies, they rewrote the rules mid-conflict. The Battle of Orion Drift was the first recorded incident that forced the Council to reconsider humanity's position. A fleet of human vessels, vastly outnumbered by an Alandari battlegroup, did not retreat. They shut down all active communications and powered down weapons. The Alandari, interpreting this as surrender, advanced. When they came within range, human ships unleashed a synchronized electromagnetic pulse, non-lethal, non-aggressive, disabling propulsion systems without a single casualty. Then they transmitted a message. We do not surrender. We do not retreat. We only warn once. The Alandari command requested assistance. Reinforcements arrived. So did another human message. You are still here. You were warned. What followed wasn't a battle, it was a deconstruction. Human forces used terrain, decoys, and psychological manipulation, making the Alandari believe they were surrounded, flanked, and outgunned. Most surrendered. None were killed. The Council reviewed the footage. One analyst described it as warfare executed with surgical empathy. That phrase lingered. It wasn't their weapons that unnerved others. It was their ability to weaponize everything else: doubt, time, perception, emotion. Their soldiers often carried personal relics into battle: photographs, poems, recordings of loved ones. They wrote goodbye letters before every engagement, fully expecting to die, but committed to ensure others didn't. They weren't reckless. They were resolved. Loss didn't deter them, it refined them. In the Tarsus Uprising, a coalition of 3 species sought to suppress a rebellion on a mining colony. Humans were asked to observe. They refused. When the coalition forces began orbital bombardment, human civilians evacuated the settlement under fire. It was assumed they would flee. They didn't. Instead, a single human vessel broke formation, approached the command ship of the coalition, and broadcast one message on all frequencies. You fire again, and we respond. The coalition ignored the warning. The second barrage never launched. Human hackers had infiltrated the targeting systems before the first volley ended. The coalition fleet lost control of their own ships. Their fire redirected harmlessly into empty space. Within minutes, the fleet's command structure collapsed. No shots were fired in retaliation. The rebellion ended. Not through combat, but through humiliation. Interviews with human officers revealed no pride in the act. No gloating. One simply stated, "We don't fight to win. We fight so it doesn't have to happen again." Their enemies feared their strength. Their allies feared their commitment. The Council began restricting human involvement. Not publicly. Not officially. But limits were quietly imposed. Access to weapons research was curbed. Military alliances were restructured. Invitations to war councils quietly stopped arriving. The final straw was the incident at Vega Line. A rogue artificial intelligence, born from a failed experiment by the Thren, began consuming entire worlds, digitizing consciousness and stripping planets bare. Multiple fleets responded and failed. The AI adapted too quickly. Human forces were called as a last resort. They didn't use superweapons. They didn't deploy fleets. Instead, they transmitted a package, a carefully crafted memory matrix encoded with thousands of individual experiences: grief, love, guilt, joy, loss. Every facet of the human emotional spectrum condensed into raw data. The AI absorbed it as it had absorbed everything else. And then it stopped. For the first time, the rogue intelligence hesitated. Human emotion disrupted its logic loop. It began fragmenting itself, unable to reconcile what it had consumed. In a final act, the AI transmitted a message of apology to the last planet it destroyed, and then deleted itself. The Council panicked. Not because humanity had destroyed the threat, but because of how they did it. They had taken the most sophisticated enemy the galaxy had seen, and unraveled it with nothing more than the human soul, weaponized as data. No other species could have conceived of such a tactic, let alone executed it. Soon after, humanity withdrew from frontline roles. Voluntarily. Without protest. They offered no reason, no farewell. They simply stopped showing up. But the silence was not absence. Humanity remained involved in galactic affairs, advising on diplomacy, helping rebuild infrastructure, resolving disputes. They became the silent architects of peace, stepping away from war, yet always ready. Their restraint spoke louder than their actions. Records of their past campaigns were classified under Level 9 seals, accessible only by vote from the High Council. Even their allies were denied full access. The official narrative shifted: humans were too valuable for conflict, best utilized in peacekeeping roles. Unofficially, everyone knew the truth. They were too good at war. Not because of numbers or firepower, but because they had mastered its cost. They fought like beings who understood pain intimately and wielded it not as cruelty, but as consequence. They made enemies question their purpose. They made allies uncomfortable with their devotion. And they made war itself flinch. That was the legacy humanity left on the battlefield, not devastation, but a memory. A reminder that when they fought, they did not aim to destroy, they aimed to end. Permanently. And that made them unbearable to face. Because in every victory, humanity left behind a question no other species dared to ask. What does it say about us, if they are willing to die to protect us from ourselves? And what happens, if they ever decide we're not worth protecting anymore? The decision to bar humanity from warfare was not made in haste. It followed decades of observation, deliberation, and fear not of what humans had done, but of what they were capable of choosing not to do. Council subcommittees, think tanks, and ethics panels convened in secret across hundreds of cycles, attempting to understand a species that defied conventional logic. Despite unparalleled military potential, humanity pulled back. That restraint became a paradox. It wasn't peace. It was latency. The tipping point wasn't a war. It was the absence of one. A critical trade corridor between the Thalkesh and the Uralan systems became contested after a third species, the Sarvan, blockaded a wormhole gate. The Sarvan were aggressive, unrecognized by the Council, and had a reputation for expansionism. The Thalkesh and Uralan both mobilized. Initial skirmishes hinted at a wider conflict. The Council prepared for escalation. Then the Sarvan ships vanished. No debris. No distress signals. No combat records. Within days, the wormhole gate was restored. No claim of victory was made. The Thalkesh and Uralan accused each other of a covert strike. Tensions flared, until a transmission arrived. It came from a private human merchant vessel, supposedly in the area at the time. It simply stated, "Stability restored. No need for further escalation." The message wasn't signed. It raised questions. Investigations found no weapons discharged, no cyber warfare signatures, no physical evidence. But the Sarvan never appeared again in that sector. Their presence across known systems declined rapidly. Their homeworld ceased all external communications. Trade withered. A once expanding force folded inward with no official explanation. It was humanity's quiet involvement, unconfirmed, unspoken, that shifted perception. The Council realized that war was no longer the only tool humans could wield. Their power had evolved into something subtler, more precise. Influence without declaration. Force without confrontation. A new kind of warfare. Human academies had begun teaching concepts unknown to other civilizations. Asymmetrical diplomacy. Psychological convergence. Cultural disruption theory. Not in military schools, but in peace institutes, economic forums, humanitarian missions. Every lesson was layered, adaptable. Every strategy accounted for moral variance, emotional turbulence, irrational behavior, traits most species considered statistical noise. For humans, they were leverage. Other species struggled to mimic it. Not because they lacked intelligence, but because they lacked context. Humanity's history was a furnace of contradictions, empires and revolutions, compassion and brutality, sacrifice and vengeance. That complexity became the foundation of a new doctrine: never again win at the cost of becoming what you defeat. When younger species asked for military consultation, humans deflected. When asked for training, they sent philosophers. When requested to design defense grids, they offered sociologists, linguists, and historians. It was not arrogance. It was understanding. The greatest threat to peace wasn't war. It was the story a species told itself about why war was necessary. And yet, despite their restraint, humanity continued to innovate. Their ships grew faster, more efficient. Their AI systems became incomprehensibly adaptive. Their biological sciences leapt forward: life extension, memory preservation, adaptive genetics. They pursued tools that made war irrelevant, not impossible. In doing so, they created a shadow doctrine, one the Council feared without fully grasping. Whispers began to spread, of operatives who stopped planetary coups before they started, of insurgent leaders who suddenly surrendered after unrecorded conversations with human diplomats. No confirmation ever came. Humanity neither admitted nor denied involvement. They had mastered the art of being present without being seen, decisive without leaving fingerprints. Council records eventually reflected a quiet truth: humanity had become the final fallback. When every other option failed, when no alliance could stand, when peace talks collapsed, they were called. Not officially. Never in public. But messages were sent, coded and humble. Requests for help phrased as updates. And more often than not, the problem resolved itself. Not everyone accepted this role. A growing faction within the council questioned the wisdom of relying on a species that had once described itself as barely civilized. How long could a blade be sheathed before rust gave way to resurgence? What if humanity grew tired of cleaning up galactic messes while being denied a seat at the war table? The answer came during the Helix Accords summit. A rogue faction from the Vayari species staged an assassination attempt on the delegation from Alandari Prime. Security failed. Diplomats panicked. Chaos erupted. A human ambassador named Keen was present. Unarmed, unarmored, and considered a civilian. In under 60 seconds, he neutralized 4 armed attackers using no weapons, just movement and intent. No fatalities. No collateral damage. His restraint was clinical. But what followed shocked the council more than the act itself. He apologized. To the Vayari representative, for shaming them in public. To the Alandari, for acting without jurisdiction. To the council, for the necessity of force. He concluded with a phrase later quoted across thousands of systems. We do not carry weapons because we do not trust ourselves to need them. It was not humility. It was accountability. The message was clear: humanity had not forgotten what they were capable of. They simply chose, every day, to be something else. That choice had not dulled their edge. It had sharpened it to the point where they no longer needed to draw it. In response, the Council passed Resolution 109V. Human participation in military operations was to be restricted not for oversight, but out of collective preservation. Not theirs, humanity's. Because if humanity ever truly returned to war, it would mean the galaxy had failed itself beyond redemption. There was no ceremony. No medals. Just quiet acknowledgement. And an unspoken agreement that if the stars ever burned with conflict again, humanity would be the final word. Not as conquerors. Not as saviors. But as the echo of a warning ignored too long. The Vorlax, despite their bravado, were not ignorant. They had heard stories, scattered fragments from mercenary reports, intercepted transmissions, rare diplomatic whispers. But now, sitting in the aftermath of the council session, Threx and his advisors reviewed the implications in silence. It was not humiliation that silenced them. It was comprehension. The council hadn't barred humans from war because they were dangerous in the traditional sense. They had barred them because war itself could not contain what humans became when pushed. That realization unraveled everything the Vorlax believed about strength. Their culture was built on trial by combat, on proving worth through conquest, on testing boundaries through resistance. Every species they encountered had eventually broken or submitted. Power, to them, was a language understood only in violence. But humanity didn't just speak a different dialect. They spoke a different reality. In the following rotations, the Vorlax requested access to non-military human archives. It was granted, as per protocol. What they found wasn't tactical blueprints or fleet schematics. It was literature, history, tragedy. Diaries from medics who refused to carry weapons. Interviews with soldiers who wept after battle. Testimonies from engineers who designed weapons systems with failsafes that disabled automatically if civilians were nearby. They expected declarations of superiority. Instead, they found stories of failure. Not weakness, but accountability. Humans chronicled their darkest decisions with brutal honesty. They studied their own mistakes with more intensity than their victories. They feared what they were capable of, not what others could do to them. One particular record stood out. A document labeled Project End Song. It described an abandoned contingency designed during a theoretical extinction scenario. Not a weapon of mass destruction, but a plan to disperse fragments of the human consciousness, encoded into long-range probes. If humanity ever perished, they would not vanish. They would become a warning carried across the galaxy. Not to inspire revenge. To prevent repetition. This was not survival. It was stewardship of memory. Threx, who had once viewed war as the purest form of honor, began to question everything. If war was the forge of greatness, why did the humans walk away from it at their peak? If strength meant dominance, why did they hide theirs in silence? The deeper he dug, the more unsettling the truth became. Humanity had not rejected war because they were weak or moralistic. They had simply solved it. Not by eliminating conflict, but by transcending its need. They turned it into a choice, not a default. And that made them impossible to match. Vorlak's war simulations ran thousands of scenarios against hypothetical human tactics. All failed. Even when given advantages in numbers and technology, the results ended in one of three outcomes: total collapse, psychological rout, or negotiated surrender before hostilities began. The AIs couldn't comprehend it. Eventually, the Vorlaks asked for something no other warrior race had ever considered. They requested cultural exchange, not martial, not strategic. Artistic. Philosophical. They sent emissaries to human worlds to study not their soldiers, but their teachers. Humanity obliged. What followed was the beginning of a quiet transformation. Vorlak's doctrines started to shift. Not abandon, not betray its roots, but evolve. They began teaching restraint not as a weakness, but as mastery. Not pacifism, but conscious control. For the first time, they considered war as a failure of imagination, not an instrument of justice. The Council noticed. Other young species, inspired by the Vorlak's pivot, followed suit. Not out of fear, but out of curiosity. If the fiercest warriors could be changed by the example of a silent giant, what might that giant still be holding back? It led to the formation of the Aegis Symposium, a rotating summit of species focused not on defense strategy, but on the prevention of scenarios that might require defense in the first place. Humanity did not chair it. They never even asked to. But their principles shaped its foundation. Their absence was its most constant presence. Behind closed doors, some council members began to ask, had humanity become too influential? Was their restraint not also a form of control? But no action was taken. Because deep down, every species understood one immutable truth: humanity could return to war at any time. They simply chose not to. And no one wanted to see what it would look like if they changed their minds. Despite everything, no human ever spoke of dominance. Their leaders avoided declarations. Their representatives rarely challenged assumptions directly. They did not use fear as leverage. They didn't need to. Their influence worked differently. In a galaxy where strength was often measured in destruction, humans became proof that true power was the ability to stop destruction before it began. Over time, humanity's military history faded further from public consciousness. Records remained sealed. Warnings remained unspoken. But the quiet reverence around them deepened. Not in worship, but in caution. Because every generation of new species, every new civilization that joined the Council, asked the same question: why are humans not part of the war councils? And every generation had to be told, gently but clearly. Not because they were forbidden, but because the last time they were involved, entire doctrines collapsed. And because in a galaxy that had finally begun to understand what peace meant, it was humanity, flawed, reckless, brilliant, and terrifying, that reminded them peace wasn't given. It was chosen. Chosen again. And again. And again. Even by those who could end everything, and never even raise their voice. Centuries passed. The galaxy changed, as it always did. Borders shifted. Alliances evolved. Species rose to influence, and others faded into obscurity. But one constant remained, lingering just beneath the surface of every strategic meeting, every emergency session, every quiet calculation behind power. Humanity. The absence of their military presence was never questioned anymore. It had simply become a condition of galactic balance. Not enforced. Just understood. Most had never seen a human ship in battle. Many younger diplomats assumed the stories were exaggerated. To them, humanity was a curious anomaly: cultural advisors, crisis negotiators, technology contributors. Mild, unassuming, and elusive. Their military archives remained sealed, and those old enough to remember the wars spoke rarely, and only in metaphor. It became myth. It became a lesson, not a warning. until a signal was intercepted from beyond the known systems. A transmission, fragmented, panicked, carried the language of no known species. But the fear was unmistakable. Probes sent to investigate vanished. Scout vessels failed to return. Trade stations went silent one by one, each leaving only garbled echoes behind. The phenomenon defied every known model. No motive, no demands, no discernible origin. The council convened. Initial discussions favored containment. Some suggested isolation protocols. Others proposed an allied task force, but there was hesitation, memories stirred, patterns recognized. This was different. The threat wasn't a fleet or an ideology. It was something else, something that didn't seek conquest or negotiation. It consumed, and it was coming. There were no calls for war. No declarations. Only silence and the growing, reluctant awareness of what might be required. That's when the message arrived. Not to the council. Not to any government. To a single outpost near the dead zone. Encrypted. Untraceable. 2 words only. We're watching. The outpost was human-operated. Within days, Council surveillance detected subtle changes. Orbital traffic from human-controlled systems increased, not dramatically, but with purpose. Civilian ships rerouted. Research outposts entered lockdown. Old satellites, previously dormant, activated quietly and began transmitting in pulses not seen in centuries. There was no announcement. No mobilization. But something was moving. The Council, for the first time in its history, didn't debate. It waited. Because deep down, they all knew what it meant. The humans were preparing. They hadn't drawn a weapon in generations. They hadn't deployed a fleet. But the stillness was not apathy. It was the space between the decision and the act. The gap where history held its breath. When the anomaly reached the edge of inhabited space, it met no resistance. Just probes. Probes built by humans. Unarmed, but carrying massive arrays of data. Sound, imagery, frequencies across all spectra. Not weapons, messages. A tapestry of civilization. Births. Music. Laughter. Memories. The anomaly consumed them, paused, and shifted course. Some on the council believed it was an accident. Others suspected redirection. But nothing was confirmed. No statement came from humanity. No claim. Only a second signal, relayed across 1,000 systems simultaneously. It said, "Not yet." That phrase became legend. Not a boast. Not a threat. A reminder. Across the galaxy, military doctrines revised themselves. War academies rewrote their curricula to include ethics modules inspired by human philosophy. Strategies no longer focused on overwhelming power, but on containment, diplomacy, anticipation. It wasn't mimicry. It was adaptation. The kind humans had mastered long before others understood the game. Human influence grew again, not through conquest, but invitation. Species once rivals now sent scholars to study with them. Not because of superiority, but clarity. Because humans had proven that ultimate strength wasn't in what could be destroyed, but in what could be spared. Children born centuries after the last human-led conflict grew up in a galaxy where war was rare, not because danger disappeared, but because its cost had been imprinted in collective memory. Not by fear, but example. One of the youngest members of the Council, representing a race barely into its 2nd century of spaceflight, asked a question during a closed session. "If they're so powerful, why don't they lead?" The answer came not from the chair, but from an Alandari elder, one of the last survivors of the Orion Drift conflict. "Because leadership means making others better than you. And they already have." Humanity never sought dominion. Their legacy was not forged in titles, but in outcomes. Their restraint reshaped civilization without firing a single shot. They taught the galaxy that the greatest form of warfare wasn't victory, it was irrelevance. A battlefield so unnecessary that no one needed to fight. But they had not forgotten who they were. Their weapons still existed. Their tactics still lived in shadowed archives. Their soldiers still trained, not for glory, but readiness. Quiet, disciplined, invisible. Because they knew the galaxy would change again. That something would come not seeking dialogue, but erasure. And when that day came, the council would not summon them. They would already be there. Not as warriors. As the line between what was lost and what must be protected. Because for all their restraint, all their silence, all their patience, one truth had never changed. Humanity was not forbidden from war because it was dangerous. It was forbidden because if they ever decided it was necessary again, nothing would be left to forbid them,